I heard yesterday a memorable concert, unforgettable. The conductor and the soloist was Marie Perahia. Shalom, Marie.
Shalom. Thank you, Ari.
It was incredible.
Thank you.
You started with Bach.
Yes.
And you played Bach like he was here around, like he was contemporary.
I feel it should sound normal.
You even dared to play it on the piano.
I know, terrible, isn't it?
How dare you?
How dare me. Yeah, but it's meaningful for us today, and it should be played on the instruments that we know today. Not exclusively. I actually studied the harpsichord. I spent 2 years with a harpsichord teacher learning how to play the harpsichord, which is very different than the piano. You know, when you play the harpsichord, you don't use the arm at all. You just use the fingers, and you have to give an impression of dynamics because, of course, we talk in dynamics, even a good harpsichordist. So they do it through articulation. They hold down notes. That way they get a crescendo, or they lift them if they want a different sound. It's all through articulation that they do, and they do also rhythmic manipulation.
And you know, I felt always with harpsichordists that because the instrument is so angular, they are so round.
Exactly. They have to make,
players.
The good players have to make this not sound angular, exactly.
But I thought about playing Bach on the piano that the best way to avoid the debate is not to play it at all.
Who shouldn't play it? The pianist shouldn't play it.
I don't know.
No.
Then we have no debate.
You know, when I was growing up, I think in my 20s and maybe even until the 30s, all the great pianists were saying you shouldn't play Bach on the piano. Clifford Curzon told me, don't go there. The only one that could play it was Wanda Landowska, who played it marvelously on some instrument that she called a harpsichord, but which wasn't really a harpsichord because it had so many stops and pedals and different sounds. And she was extraordinary. She was really extraordinary. That after Landowska, nobody could play it, certainly not on the piano. Arau used to say that in interviews that I read, you couldn't play Bach. And actually, before he died, he made some recordings of Bach, so he changed his mind. But the general prevailing view, Bach wasn't for the piano.
I would like to ask you why. Because Arau, Curzon are reasonable people. So what's the danger of playing Bach on our beloved instrument? What are the dangers?
Well, the dangers are either it gets too romantic and too carried away and too technicolor-ish, or it gets too plain and there's no feeling in it and there's no movement in it. And it's very hard to reach a kind of balance between these two things, I think.
The Bach specialists who play Bach today, they play it so fast and so much staccato and so articulated. Yeah. As though Bach never acknowledged legato playing.
And that's what he wrote. The cantabile art of legato playing is what he wrote about the inventions. No, I think he cultivated legato very much.
You started with a D major piano concerto, which is actually the violin concerto in E major.
Correct.
Can you show us how it starts? It's amazing. All the violinists played with long bows, schlepping.
No, you know, but he writes quarter notes when he writes it for the violin, and in the piano version, he writes eighth notes with rests. But I think he means the same. It's a very festive beginning. Yeah.
I'd like to ask you a question. Yeah. When Bach writes Erbarme dich, or very sad music like the E-flat minor prelude, and so on, so we know where we are. But when it is just this kind of music, how do we know?
Well, I think very often with Bach, you have to think in terms of God. He's celebrating God and celebrating life, and that's a celebration. It's a call.
Mr. Bach goes to town, he
Yes.
goes to Zimmermann Cafe.
No, absolutely. He celebrates life in all its variety. He's a man of this world. But he has a feeling for the suffering of mankind. Whenever he speaks about mankind as a general thing, there's a note of suffering. You know, that brings me to something I would like to share with you, because I was thinking about this program when I was last night. And I was thinking, for me, the most important aspect of Bach is that it comes from chorale. Whatever Bach did, the chorale was central to it. It was on every Sunday, he had to write a new cantata, and he had to base it on a chorale. And by the way, the chorale is not always his melodies. They're very often either Martin Luther or a whole lot of other people that are not, that Bach didn't know even. And what is his great contribution is the harmonization. He sets it in a way that expresses the words. In fact, when he taught composition, the first thing that he taught about was chorales. And he had the student put as many different basses, different underlinings, as possible, so that every mood of that chorale was explored. Now, I have a chorale here, which I brought. It's called Ach wie pflichtig, ach wie nichtig.
I like it a lot. It's E major?
A minor.
A minor.
A minor.
Yeah.
How brief, how fleeting is der Menschenleben. And he sets it. That chord is Menschenleben. He has a feeling for the suffering of man, always. And then he says it's like a mist that suddenly appears. But this mist also disappears suddenly. So too man's life. That beautiful 4/3 cadence at the end demonstrates the fleetingness of this life, the tragedy of that fleetingness.
I would like to ask you to play a little bit from the French suite in E major.
Yes.
Is there a choral behind it?
Yes. You see, of course, this is more, like you say, the living music. This is more secular, let's say. But, for instance, this chorale about God's greatness. Can underpin. And then he goes into different modulations, which I find very beautiful.
So even behind this kind of innocent beauty,
Yes.
there is the choral.
There is, and I feel that very strongly, there is a background behind everything that's on the surface, that's in the foreground. There is some kind of unifying idea in the background, or in all of Bach's music, which gives it, I think, a kind of momentum forward and backwards, a kind of, you have to follow what's underneath.
Even if it is a kind of dance suite, which is, of course, not to be danced, but about the dances once upon a time.
Quite.
So even in this kind of music is a combination of a dance idea with choral.
Exactly. In fact, in the same suite, in the next piece, the Courant, you remember I showed you. There are all these melodies behind the main melody. And if it's not taken into account, it gets like this.
This kind
It's
of
not music.
Bach playing, you know, when I hear that, I feel that must be a handle from the piano going to the face of the pianist and slap on him. I would like to have such a piano that there is this kind of handle.
It's not music, that it makes importance of every note. And when every note is important, none of the line underneath the notes gets important.
I remember once a fantastic statement of Bartok. They asked him how to play or to react to somebody's playing of Beethoven or Bach, doesn't matter. And he said, how to do it, I don't know. But the way you did it is not possible.
It's not right.
So the way many people play Bach is not possible. So what is forbidden? Don't take pedal, don't make crescendo, don't. But Mari, please tell me what to do. What can we do?
Well, let's get back to the nose, because I want to argue all of those no's. You know, in this very concerto that I was playing, let me look at it again, Bach writes out a diminuendo. You say don't play crescendos, don't play diminuendos, but that's a natural part of making music. And he actually writes down a diminuendo. I'll show you after this. That's written piano, pianissimo, yet more pianissimo. That's meant as a diminuendo. Why is that diminuendo there? Because it's outlining one chord. That chord has to resolve. And Bach is telling you, I don't know where it's going to resolve. Where's it going to go? This hasn't resolved. It goes there. It gives you the reason for the rest of the music. And that diminuendo is a very important doubt in the music. And there are many crescendos that are almost written out. He doesn't write the word crescendo, but it's implied.
You said you would like to argue also with pedals.
I could argue with pedals. There's this kind of feeling that Bach should be dry, which I'm very much against, because you just go to a church and listen to an organ and tell me if that's dry. The amount of reverberation, the amount of overhang. And in fact, I got this from playing the harpsichord. If you do a skip, it'll sound like a hiccup, but not on the harpsichord because it has an overhang. But the best... And there's another reason for pedal, and this is more subtle. Rather than the chord standing there, this, just a little bit of pedal gives it motion. So those scales move to something instead of...
I often have with Bach this kind of thinking and feeling that he sits there on the pedestal and he looks at us and he says, my children, look, I know where I am and where you are, and you can do anything you wish. You want to play me in jazz? Do
It's
jazz.
fine. It works.
Do you want to play like this? Do like this. Do you want even to play me romantic? No, I know my place. You should know your place. And he's more tolerant than, for instance, Schubert. Schubert, if you do the wrong thing, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
So why Bach has got this kind of big flexibility?
It's extraordinary. because there's so much going on in the music, contrapuntally, and so you can't muck about too much. You can't be indulgent. No Bach player can afford to be indulgent in a fugue because you have so many things going on, so that he reins you in a little bit. And the power of it is just so strong that I think whatever you do, the music will come out.
I would like you to play another part of the suite, another movement of the E major suite. Would you mind?
No.
You know, when you played the saraband, I thought, oh my God, this was once upon a time a dance. And what happened to the saraband in the hands of Bach?
I don't know, it got, in a way, richer. There is an element of a dance, but it's very personal. It's strange to say that about Bach, who's so universal, but there's such a feeling of thankfulness. And then every phrase goes up. Up. And up. That within this really secular piece, there is a kind of gratitude to God, nevertheless.
How come this saraband, once upon a time a dance, became a container for so many emotions? If it is in minor, it's like crying and praying. But even when it is in E major,
It's deep.
it's so spiritual.
It's spiritual.
It's even more Schubertian spirituality in major,
Yes.
the super major.
Yes. There is, I think the dance itself got slower, more stylized, and there it became room for personal feeling.
So in the whole suite, there is one part, the saraband, which is...
Exactly, exactly. Very often elaborated with ornaments the second time. When I remember doing the English suites, these sarabands had very ornamental second sections, with almost like Chopin.
And how to make the ornamentation without making it fancy.
Right. I think that when one plays Bach, no matter what one's religious feelings are, in Bach you become religious. There's no way around it. You can't be an atheist, and you have to accept what religion can give to man.
Yeah, and we can see him walking between the two churches he served.
Yes.
Just every Sunday. And
He was a very believing man. And all these books now written about atheism, they're all very interesting and have a lot of logic in them, but they're of no use to a musician who wants to get deeper into music. You have to know what were the motivating ideas, what was Bach attached to, what were his important ideals, and I think it's through man's relation to God.
In Ship May Safely Graze, there is a very common story, and yet so much spirituality again.
Exactly. I want to also stress, you know, we were talking about how chorales shape music. This is obviously a choral prelude, even though it's secular. But before that, there's an introduction. And he writes piano, pianissimo, piano, pianissimo. And this little orchestral introduction, which is what it is, played by two flutes in the cantata, this will come back in certain moments of tension, of chromatic tension and minor, let's say. And this is an elaboration that now gives the composer more latitude. Instead of staying strictly to the chorale, we go into a bigger piece. We go into something that will later become classical and romantic, another harmonic sphere.
So why don't we start with the introduction and go throughout?
Okay.
Mari, I'm speechless. And when you played it, or later I thought, oh, he composed it for the Prince of Weissenfels, who later put him in prison. This was only, yeah, this is a phenomenal story. Bach is the only one great composer who was in prison.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, for 1 month.
1 month?
Yeah, and
That's
why?
a crime.
He wanted to be free. He wanted to quit. He wanted to leave Weissenfels. And the prince said, don't you dare, I must give you permission. And then, no permission, go to jail.
I didn't know that.
He was in jail. And he wrote it for that prince.
My God. It's a gorgeous piece.
And you played it. And you played it.
Thank you.
I'm sure you know that Perach, your name, Perahia, means flower
Yes.
in Hebrew. And I thought of many pianists playing Bach like dried vegetable or like frozen vegetable from the past, like they lock all the doors to the past.
Yes.
And when you play it, I feel that the flowers are fresh.
That's
And,
very sweet, thank you. But I feel that with all music, you have to make it fresh. You have to make it from you. Whatever is possible of your emotions have to go into that. Not to see your emotions, but to see Bach's emotions and to see Mozart's emotions. And that. You're a vehicle for something greater, but you have to use yourself. You have to express yourself with dynamics, with feelings, with everything you have.